I'm Wes and you're watching Daleicious. Today we're making coffee cake. Coffee cake is a simple, lightly vanilla flavored cake with a brown sugar topping. This is a go-to weekend recipe, and yes, my mom also likes this as an emergency, people are coming over unexpectedly recipe. I have no source for this one. It's a mystery. I will personally take credit for some modifications and adjusting the recipe so that it can be used with weight measurements. You can very easily get the ingredients ready and add it into a large mixing bowl, and if I wasn't filming, I would do just that. For the sake of filming, I'll be putting them all in separate bowls, and you can feel free to do that as well. The first step in any baking is to turn the oven on. Preheat the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, which I suppose is around 190 Celsius for you Brits out there. Now to get started with the dry ingredients. The first ingredient is all-purpose flour. You'll need 1 3/4 cups. This worked out to be exactly 265 grams. Next, you'll need 3 teaspoons of baking powder. This is baking powder, not baking soda, so make sure you're using the right stuff. 3 teaspoons of baking powder worked out to be 17 grams. Listen, I know white sugar is classified as a wet ingredient if you're like a super hardcore baker, but you'll need 2/3 of a cup of white granulated sugar. If you're missing a 2/3 cup measure like me, just use the 1/3 cup measure twice. The white sugar ended up being 168 grams. That's all of the dry ingredients settled. You can combine all of those into a large mixing bowl now if you like. You can also do the butter now as well. You can substitute margarine if you prefer, but butter tastes better from my experience. You'll need 1/3 of a cup of butter. This should be about 75 grams. The butter is going to get blended together with the dry ingredients, so you can just throw them all in together now if you want. Now you'll want to get the wet ingredients sorted out. Starting with the wet ingredients, you'll want 1 cup of milk in a separate mixing bowl. I'm using 2% here, but all milk variants and substitutes should be fine. For the sake of consistency, I weighed the milk too. This ended up being 246 grams, but you should just use the volume measurement. To this milk, you'll want to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, followed by 1 large egg. You should then whisk the milk, egg, and vanilla together using a whisk or a fork. This just helps the final cake batter come together without developing too much gluten. Set this aside and wipe up that milk and egg, you slob. Now for the final assembly of the cake. Add all of the dry ingredients together in a large mixing bowl. You'll want to give this an initial mix up to make sure the sugar, baking powder, and flour are evenly combined. Now you can add the butter. You'll need to cut in the butter into this mixture. You can use a fork, whisk, or spatula, or some combination of all three. You're probably asking yourself if you can use a stand mixer for this, and you absolutely can and probably should. I just don't have one down here, so elbow grease it is. You don't need to worry about a tough cake yet. You'll only start to develop gluten once liquids get added into the mix. Once your butter is incorporated and your mix is looking a little something like this, you can add the pre-blended wet ingredients. Simply dump this in and give it a quick mixing with the whisk. You do not want to overmix this, so just make sure that it's fully combined and there's no raw flour present. Now you can put this in a greased 8x8 metal or glass baking tin, but I have a silicone tray, so I'm going to use that instead. I like to use a metal 8x8 tin as a base since the silicone tin is a little too floppy for my liking, and it fits just perfectly in here. But now just dump the cake mix into your tin of choice. Make sure to scrape the bowl to get as much of the batter out as possible. Then smooth out the cake in your tray and set it aside. Onto the brown sugar topping. You'll want 3 heaping tablespoons of butter. This worked out at 63 grams by weight. Next up is brown sugar, the main event here. You'll want 1 tightly packed cup of brown sugar. This was 197 grams. For some additional flavor, you'll want a touch of cinnamon. This is mostly to taste, but 1 to 2 teaspoons should get you there. I used a paltry 5 grams, which was about 2 teaspoons. You can just immediately combine this with the brown sugar. Now you'll need to melt the butter. You can quickly just nuke this in the microwave for about 30 to 40 seconds, and then short bursts of 10 to 20 seconds until all of it's melted down. Now you'll just want to combine the melted butter, cinnamon, and brown sugar. Mix this thoroughly with a fork. It's kind of difficult to describe how this is supposed to look and feel like, but it's a bit like wet sand. My mix was a little bit too wet, so I added some more brown sugar. This topping is something I never get totally perfect, but you'll be able to feel it out eventually. You should err on the side of it being too dry rather than too wet. Once your topping is mixed, you can sprinkle it liberally over the cake. Be extremely generous here. but if you have some left over, you can reserve it for the final service. With the cake fully assembled, it's time to chuck it into the center of a preheated 375-degree oven for about 30 minutes total. At the 15-minute mark, it should still be fairly liquidy, but you should be able to give it a turn to make sure it's browning evenly. I pulled my cake out at the 29-minute mark, but I also had the convection setting on. A quick knife test and it comes out clean. If yours doesn't come out like this, throw it back in the oven for a few minutes and keep testing until you get the illustrious clean knife. This will be far too hot to eat right now, so wait about 5 to 10 minutes for it to cool down. Coffee cake is best served warm, so once it's cooled down a little bit, you can throw any extra topping you have over the cake and then grab a slice. You can then serve it up with some butter and a nice hot cup of joe. Coffee cake is definitely a crowd pleaser, and it's a nice in-between meals snack. It's best eaten between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. from my experience. Of course, that being said, I don't actually drink coffee, but everyone else in my family does. This cup just doesn't have anything in it.